Hey everyone, welcome back. This story comes from Daniel in Sydney. He sent it in over a month, updating me as things kept happening. He asked me to use his first name only. What you're about to hear is one of the geekiest, most disturbing accounts I've ever received. It's set deep in the Australian Outback and involves black magic that has been running in his family for generations. Let's begin. I'm 37 years old. 2 years ago, my grandfather passed away and left me his sheep station, a remote property called Crow's End, about 4 hours west of Broken Hill in far western New South Wales. It's nothing but red dirt, salt bush and endless sky for hundreds of kilometres. My grandfather had lived there alone for 40 years after my grandmother disappeared in the 1980s. The police called it a missing person case. The locals called it something else. I was going through a rough divorce, barely seeing my 8-year-old son, and the station seemed like the perfect place to disappear and start again. I sold my apartment in Sydney, packed my ute, and drove out there in March last year. The first few weeks were peaceful in a way I'd never known. Mornings watching the sun burn the horizon red, evenings listening to the wind move through the mulga trees. I kept a small flock of sheep, fixed fences, and tried not to think about the city. The house was old but solid, tin roof, wide verandas, a big kitchen with a wood stove. Everything felt normal. Then the full moon in April changed everything. I woke at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of sheep screaming. Not bleating, screaming. I grabbed the spotlight and ran out. In the home paddock I found 12 ewes dead in a perfect circle, throats cut clean, not a drop of blood on the ground. Their eyes were wide open, staring at the sky. The ground around them had strange symbols scratched into the red dirt. Circles inside circles, lines that looked like they formed words in some language I didn't recognise. I called the police in Broken Hill. They drove out, took photos, said it was probably wild dogs or someone playing a sick prank. They left before lunch. I buried the sheep myself. That night I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I heard footsteps on the veranda. Slow, deliberate, like someone wearing boots. I went outside with the rifle. Nothing. But on the wooden boards I found wet footprints leading from the darkness straight to my bedroom window, and then they stopped. The next full moon it got worse. I started finding small dead animals, lizards, birds, even a dead kangaroo joey, arranged on my doorstep in the same circular pattern. Each time the symbols were more complex. I began having dreams of my grandfather standing in the shearing shed at night, cutting his own arm and letting the blood drip onto an old stone altar while he whispered in a language that sounded half English, half something older. I decided to search the property properly. Behind the shearing shed, half hidden by rusted iron sheets, I found a trapdoor I'd never noticed. It led down into a small underground room dug out of the clay, cool, dry and lined with old railway sleepers. In the centre was a stone altar the size of a kitchen table. On it sat a heavy leather-bound book with no title, a rusted iron knife, and dozens of small glass jars filled with dried blood. The walls were covered in the same symbols I'd seen in the paddock, painted in what looked like old blood. I opened the book. The first page had my grandfather's handwriting. Crow's End Station, 1978. The Hollow One accepts the blood of the line. One son, every generation. The station stays alive. We stay alive. The rest of the pages were rituals, step-by-step instructions on how to call something they called the Hollow One. It wasn't just black magic. It mixed old Irish occult my grandfather brought from County Kerry with symbols my grandfather had copied from local Aboriginal rock art he was never supposed to touch. He had written notes in the margins about binding the shadow to the bloodline so the land never dies. I should have burned the book that day. Instead, I took it upstairs and started reading. By the June full moon, I was blacking out. I would go to bed normal and wake up at dawn with fresh cuts on my arms arranged in the same symbols, standing barefoot in the underground room with the book open in front of me. My clothes would be covered in red dust and blood that wasn't mine. Once I woke up in the middle of the night, paddock holding the iron knife, surrounded by a dead sheep again. I had no memory of walking there. I tried to leave. I packed the ute and got as far as the front gate. Every time I reached the cattle grid, the engine would die. Every single time. I'd sit there in the dark while the wind howled and something tapped on the roof of the ute. 3 slow taps, then silence. I'd turn the key and it would start again, but only if I drove back toward the house. In July, I started seeing the shadows move when there was no wind. They looked like tall, thin men made of darkness, standing at the edge of the veranda at dusk. They never came closer than the fence line, but they watched. I could feel their eyes on me even inside the house with all the lights on. I drove into Wilcannia and found an old Aboriginal elder named Uncle Jimmy who had known my grandfather. He took one look at the photos I showed him of the symbols and spat on the ground. "That's not magic," he said. "That's poison. Your grandfather stole from the old people and twisted it with his own devilry. The Hollow One isn't a spirit. It's a hole that eats men from the inside. Your family has been feeding its sons for 60 years. It won't stop until the last one is gone." He gave me a small pouch of red ochre and told me to paint the real symbols over the false ones on the altar. "But once you open that door," he said, "you can't close it with paint." I did it anyway. The night of the August full moon was the night everything broke. I woke up at midnight already standing in the underground room. The book was open to the final ritual. My arms were bleeding from fresh cuts forming a perfect circle around the altar. The iron knife was in my hand. The shadows were no longer outside. They were inside the room with me, circling slowly, whispering my name in my grandfather's voice. Then I saw it. In the centre of the altar, the air tore open like black cloth ripping. The Hollow One stepped through, a thing with my grandfather's face but stretched too long, eyes completely white, body made of moving shadow and red dust. It spoke without moving its mouth. "You are the last of the line, Daniel. Finish the binding and the station lives forever. Refuse, and I take your son next." I saw a vision flash in front of me, my 8-year-old boy standing alone on the same altar, bleeding. I screamed and drove the iron knife straight into the centre of the book. The Hollow One howled, a sound like every sheep that had ever died on this land screaming at once. The underground room shook. The shadows rushed at me, tearing at my skin with fingers made of freezing wind. I painted the ochre symbols over the altar while it tried to stop me, blood pouring from my arms, the thing clawing at my back. The final symbol clicked into place like a lock turning. The Hollow One shattered into 1,000 pieces of black glass that cut my face and hands as they fell. The underground room went silent except for my breathing. I crawled out at sunrise covered in blood and dust. The station looked the same, but something was gone. The wind felt clean for the first time since I arrived. I sold the property 3 weeks later to a mining company. They bulldozed the shearing shed and filled in the underground room. I haven't had a single blackout since. But last week my son came to stay with me in Sydney for the school holidays. He drew a picture at the kitchen table, a perfect circle of dead sheep, and a tall shadow man standing in the centre. He looked up at me with completely wide eyes for half a second and smiled. Then he blinked and was normal again. He asked me, "Dad, when are we going back to Grandad's station? The man there said he's still waiting for us." Daniel told me yesterday that he's moving interstate and changing his name. He says every full moon he still hears the wind whispering his son's name outside the window. If this one got under your skin, tell me in the comments which part stayed with you the longest. And if you've ever inherited property that felt wrong, send the story in. I read every single one. Stay safe out there. Some doors in the Australian bush should never be opened. I'll see you in the next one.